Hey there, guys. All right, today we are back with the Great War. I think I'm gonna make this a weekly series as well. We shall see. This is Germany in Two-Front War and the Schlieffen-Plan. Week dose. Week 2. Before we dive into the video, make sure you check out the links below in my description box or my pinned comment. Got a link to my gaming channel here on YouTube and a link to my Twitch channel. I would love it if you threw me a follow. Yeah, Germany in Two-Front War and the Schlieffen-Plan. Obviously, I do not know much about World War I in terms of the week-by-week information, but I'd say I know a good bit about World War I. At least, I knew a good bit about the information that was covered in the first week of World War I. So let's see how well my knowledge has held up, and if I remember enough on week 2.
My name is Indy Nidal, and welcome to the Great War.
I love their intro.
We left off last time with the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
I love the set design. I can't get over the set design. It's so nice. I love it.
Declaring war on the Kingdom of Serbia. And I'm going to begin today with a couple of telegrams. Now, in Russia, there were very real fears that Austria's plans might extend to more than just Serbian occupation or Serbian punishment. Russia thought that Serbia might actually lose her independence. You see, Austria had mobilized 3/4 of her army, which was way more than enough to deal with Serbia. So on July 29th, as Austria began bombarding Belgrade, Russia partially mobilized her army just in case. The Tsar, though, did not want a war with Germany, who had pledged to support Austria-Hungary. So he telegraphed his cousin, Kaiser Wilhelm, quote, "To try to avoid such a calamity as a European war, I beg you, in the name of our old friendship, to do what you can to stop your allies from going too far." End
Nicky.
quote. He signed it, Nicky. At the same
He really signed it, Nicky? Oh my god. Dude. The amount of added context that this channel is giving on World War I. But this might be just like shit. If you're studying World War I feel like this channel and their series here is you're gonna need it. You need it now. I feel like this is something that is like a necessity. Channels making me feel like they are a necessity in understanding World War I.
same time, the Kaiser was telegraphing back, quote, "I am exerting the utmost influence
Did he also sign it, Willie?
to induce the Austrians to deal straightly, to arrive at a satisfactory understanding with you." End quote. This was signed, Willie.
Oh my
However,
God.
that same day, the German fleet began to mobilize, and in response, the British fleet was sent to its war stations in the North Sea in case of a possible attack. Now, at that point, the allied pair of France and Russia were putting pressure on Britain to declare that in case of a German attack on Russia's ally France, Britain would join the war. But Britain, especially the Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey, wouldn't commit. Okay, important stuff now. Germany told Britain in a secret message that if Britain remained neutral, Germany would take no territory from France except her colonies. This provoked the opposite effect, though, showing Grey once and for all that Germany was committed to going to war against Russia. Now, in Russia on the 29th, there was no declaration of war, but a draft of nearly 6 million men began, and the army was already moving towards the Austrian border. And it was at 5 p.m. on July 30th that the Russian general mobilization began. See, the Tsar finally signed this order because of partial German mobilization and his worries about being unready on the Polish front.
Oh, wow. So it's really, World War I is just a series of unfortunate misunderstandings, or it's a lot like, yeah, people kind of, I guess, things getting carried away. I think that's the proper way to say it. Things getting carried away, snowballing faster than the leaders of these nations can really comprehend and handle them. And so because they're snowballing so fast, they are reacting as fast as they can, and their reactions are bad.
It all actually got a little confusing here. Okay, German Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg telegraphed Vienna not to mobilize against Russia, but the same day, German Chief of Staff Moltke telegraphed his opposite Austrian number Conrad, mobilize at once. So who was really in charge? And then Germany sent Russia an ultimatum to stop all war measures of any kind against Austria and Germany within 24 hours. This was rejected. Now you could see that this was becoming a real mess, but at the end of July, all of the various armies were pressuring their political leaders because many of the leaders were against the war, but the armies were afraid of being unready, and they all wanted to move as quickly as possible. On July 29th, a German...
So, and also I think, I don't know if I said this in week 1, but another thing that is important, and what is great that they are talking about how these people did not want war, is that also the last time that these nations all had a European war was the Napoleonic Wars. And while the Napoleonic Wars did not bring the destruction that World War I would bring, hence why I think these nations were still, in a sense, rather willing to still go down the path of war. Of course, as they are making it clear in this video, they did not necessarily want full-blown war, but they also, you know, weren't really doing anything themselves to say, hey, I don't want war, right? They are still mobilizing their large amount of forces. They're still taking pretty active war measures against one another without, outright fighting. So the Napoleonic Wars they still have that kind of in their mind, from my point of view. This is how I look at it, is they still have it in their in their mindset, but because it was so far away, but it also did not bring about such high levels of destruction that World War I would end up bringing. Hence why they are more willing for war in World War I, and then in World War II, why so many people were not willing for the war.
An ultimatum to Belgium was prepared. What? Belgium? What, little neutral Belgium? Why Belgium, you ask? Here's why. See, if Germany was going to war with Russia, she could not help but be worried about France invading her from behind, because again, France and Russia were committed allies. So here was the idea, the moment you've all been waiting for, the Schlieffen-Plan. Alfred von Schlieffen had been the German Army Chief of Staff from 1891 to 1905, and here was his big idea in case of a war with both Russia and France. France would have to be knocked out of the war immediately, so all of the troops could focus on the more daunting task of attacking Russia, okay? So Germany would make a swift attack through Holland and Belgium, completely bypassing the heavily defended Franco-German border.
And I think part of the context as to why the focus was on knocking out France first instead of Russia is, one, France, as I've said numerous times before, France historically was seen as the predominant military land force of Europe, really up until 1870. That is when Germany, I would say, takes the lead and is seen as the dominant force. However, Germany still rightly sees France as a significant threat. They are still a very formidable army. But then also, right, they're geographically closer, but also, you can do a short campaign in France, whereas you cannot fight a short campaign in Russia, because Russia's size, right? But I think my reasoning for this plan is that they, because of the historical dominance of the French military, is that they wanted to deal with the French first, get them out of the way, but then also another reason, there's numerous reasons why the Schlieffen-Plan is actually a genuinely good idea for the context of France and Russia being allies for Germany, is also Russia does take quite a long time to mobilize its forces. So dealing with France first and then going after Russia, it makes sense.
And sweeping down into Paris from the north. Moltke streamlined the plan a bit by skipping Holland, but the idea was to take Paris within 6 weeks and thus avoid a two-front war. Now, we'll go into that in more depth later. But Belgium was neutral, and Britain had a treaty with her. And on July 31st, Britain asked France and Germany if they would respect Belgian neutrality. France said yes, but Germany did not respond. So Britain eventually sent an ultimatum of her own. If Belgium were attacked, Britain would go to war. In all of these countries, people were enlisting like crazy, and
In Germany, but they were bluffing, essentially.
nationalistic fever was going off the rails. In France, for example, Jean Jaurès, leader of the Socialist Party, who was appealing to all the European working classes to stop the war, was assassinated on the 31st. Ironically, this actually caused more shock around Europe than Franz Ferdinand's assassination did. But it showed that in France there was a great deal of enthusiasm for the war. See, many people wanted revenge for the loss against Prussia over 40 years earlier. Back to Russia and Germany. Now, the day after Russia mobilized, Germany also mobilized. Now, this was presented in the Reichstag as purely defensive, okay? We have to mobilize to defend ourselves because they did it first. And this was pretty much the only way the German military high command could convince the Social Democrats to agree with the mobilization. And on the evening of August 1st, the German ambassador gave Russia the German declaration of war, which resulted from Russia rejecting the German ultimatum to stand down. Actually, as it turned out, the German ambassador actually gave the Russians two versions of the declaration of war. One that claimed Russia refused to respond to Germany, and one that said the Russian response was unacceptable. Yep, that's the kind of thing you want to avoid in a diplomatic service. The Kaiser at first ordered an attack on only Russia, but Moltke convinced him this wasn't really possible since most of the army was already committed in the West, and that evening, German troops entered Luxembourg to secure the telegraph and the railways. Here we go. On August 2nd, German troops crossed into France for the first time in over 40 years, and there were several small border skirmishes. At 7 that evening, Germany gave Belgium an ultimatum. Give German troops free passage through Belgium. Belgium refused. On August 3rd, Germany declared war on France, and that same day occupied 3 towns in Russian Poland. On August 4th, German troops entered Belgium, and Britain declared war on Germany. Now, many of those in England who had been anti-war before were suddenly very much for the war. Grey, the Foreign Secretary, for example, now believed that if Germany wasn't stopped, then all European national independence was just a fiction. In the Mediterranean, the Ottoman Empire began mining the Dardanelles on August the 3rd. Now, the Turks were not yet going to war, and we'll see more of them in a few weeks. But what of Serbia? I mean, this whole thing snowballed because of issues between Serbia and Austria-Hungary, right? Well, we're going to get into that in much more depth next week, I promise. Now, in much of Europe, there was huge optimism about the war. I mean, everybody really thought that they were going to win. Even though by this time there were several million soldiers marching around Europe, this was still the war that would be over by Christmas. The Russian High Command, for example, asked for new typewriters, but were told that the war would not be long enough to justify the expense. And because of all this, everyone's military plans called for huge immediate attacks, since there seemed to be no point saving resources for later when you could just win right now. But here's the thing. The wars people looked back on were short wars like the Franco-Prussian War, but they really should have looked at the American Civil War to get an idea of how long...
Oh my God. This is something that's never talked about, and I love that they're doing it. Yes, the American Civil War is essentially the warning of, hey, this is what modern war is going to become. The Franco-Prussian War was really like, peak German luck, and then the French just fucking shit out of luck. That's essentially what the Franco-Prussian War was. The American Civil War was more representative of what war would be. And also, you could argue, you can look back at the Napoleonic War. That's a long-time war. That's essentially a war that lasted like over a decade. Look at.
And how bloody modern warfare was going to be. All right, on August 5th, the German Empire reached her first serious military obstacle, Liege. Now, that day, the Germans failed to take any of the 12 forts of the city. Ludendorff managed to enter Liege on the 7th, but taking the forts was necessary for the German advance. Germany brought in her big guns, and this was accomplished in only a few days. But this is really important. You see, France and Belgium had strategically placed fortresses all over them. They were very expensive and heavily defended. But one of the first things the war showed was the technological advance in artillery. Heavy howitzers could bombard fortresses from 10 miles away without real fear of retaliation. and the fortresses were just sitting ducks. So all of the fortresses attacked in 1914 fell real quickly, and all that money and all that effort to build them up was for nothing. So, to bring us up to date, on August the 6th, Austria-Hungary officially declared war on Russia, and Serbia declared war on Germany. If you want to know what happened in the last episode, click right here, and let me know how you liked it. And if you have any...
Fuck, this is amazing. I'm loving this series. I want to just keep going. Honestly, this is one of those series that, like, I could probably just fucking binge watch right through. Damn. Oh, I'm loving this. This was Germany in Two-Front War in the Schlieffen-Plan. The Great War, Week 2. I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.